Infertile millionaire didn't knew he had 2 kids just like him, until he throws a winter party. Where you watching from? Comment below. Now enjoy this beautiful story. The morning sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Alexander Hayes' penthouse, casting long golden streaks across the imported Italian marble floors. At 45, Alexander had amassed the kind of wealth most could only dream of, the type that afforded him this spectacular view of Manhattan's skyline and the ability to plan what would be the most talked-about winter gala of the season. He stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the December snow gently dust the city below. His reflection in the glass revealed a man with salt and pepper hair, sharp features that had only grown more distinguished with age, and eyes that carried a hint of melancholy despite his success. "The final guest list has been approved, Mr. Hayes," his personal assistant, Vanessa, announced as she walked briskly into the living room, tablet in hand. 317 confirmed attendees, including several prominent city officials and that tech billionaire you wanted to network with. Alexander nodded, not turning from the window. "And the announcement preparations? The ring presentation. All set. The jeweler delivered the custom setting yesterday. It's in your safe. The string quartet has the cue for when you're ready to make the announcement, and the champagne fountain will be unveiled right after." Vanessa's efficiency was why he paid her an exorbitant salary. Nothing slipped through her meticulous planning. Perfect. Alexander finally turned, setting his coffee down on a nearby table. "This has to be flawless, Vanessa. Rebecca deserves nothing less than perfection for our engagement announcement." Vanessa smiled. "After dating for 2 years, I think she's expecting it, sir. But the winter wonderland theme and the surprise element will still take her breath away." Alexander allowed himself a small smile. At 45, he had finally found someone he wanted to build a future with, even if that future wouldn't include the children he had once dreamed of. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had everything money could buy except the ability to create life. A cruel twist of fate diagnosed when he was just 30, shortly before his first wife, Catherine, had left him. "Sir," Vanessa hesitated, her usual confidence faltering slightly. "There is one unexpected RSVP I should make you aware of." The change in her tone made Alexander raise an eyebrow. "Oh. Catherine Winters, your ex-wife, has accepted the invitation. She's indicated she'll be bringing 2 guests." The room suddenly felt several degrees colder as Alexander's jaw tightened. "Catherine? I didn't authorize her invitation. It was on the courtesy list for business associates. Her new design firm works with several of your partners. I flagged it for you last month, but you were in Tokyo for the merger talks." Alexander vaguely remembered signing off on a stack of documents during that trip, too preoccupied with the billion-dollar deal to scrutinize every name. Catherine. It had been nearly 12 years since their divorce, a painful dissolution of what he had once thought would be forever. After his diagnosis, she had stayed for 2 more years, but the strain had proven too much. The endless fertility treatments, the growing resentment, his own withdrawal into work as a coping mechanism. It had all culminated in her walking away to find the family he couldn't give her. "Should I contact her office and revoke the acceptance?" Vanessa asked carefully. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, memories washing over him like a cold wave. "No," he finally said, his voice firm. "It's been over a decade. We're adults. I'm announcing my engagement to Rebecca. If Catherine wants to witness that, so be it." He straightened his posture, sliding back behind the mask of the confident business mogul. "Just make sure she's seated far from the main table." "Of course, sir." Vanessa made a note before continuing with the day's agenda, but Alexander's mind had already drifted elsewhere. Catherine would be bringing 2 guests. Had she remarried? Did she have the children she had so desperately wanted? The thought landed like a stone in his stomach. He told himself it was ancient history, that he had moved on, but the familiar ache of what could never be still lingered beneath the surface of his carefully constructed life. Later that evening, as Alexander's driver navigated through the snow-covered streets toward his midtown office, his phone chimed with a message from Rebecca. A selfie of her in a boutique, a hint of white fabric visible in the mirror behind her. "Hunting for the perfect dress for your mysterious winter party. Wish you'd give me a hint about the theme. Love you." Alexander smiled despite the heaviness that had settled in his chest since the morning. Rebecca was everything he could ask for: brilliant, independent, kind, and crucially, she had made peace with the fact that he couldn't have children before they'd even gotten serious. At 38, she was focused on her career as a neurosurgeon and had never expressed any maternal yearnings. They were perfectly matched in that regard, Two ambitious professionals who had found companionship without the complicated desires that had torn his first marriage apart. He typed back, "The surprise is half the fun. Just make sure it's something that makes you feel like a princess." He hesitated before adding, "I love you too." As the car pulled up to the gleaming skyscraper bearing the Hayes Industries logo, Alexander pushed thoughts of Catherine to the back of his mind. He had built an empire from the ground up, transformed his father's struggling manufacturing business into a global technology conglomerate. He had overcome every obstacle life had thrown at him, except for that one biological impossibility. But he had made his peace with it, or so he told himself. In the years after his divorce he had buried himself in work, expanded into international markets and doubled his net worth. Success had been his substitute for the family he couldn't have. The week leading up to the gala passed in a flurry of final preparations. The ballroom of the Whitley, New York's most exclusive hotel, was transformed into a breathtaking winter wonderland. Crystal icicles hung from the ceiling, catching light and scattering it like diamonds across the space. Towering ice sculptures, white roses and strategically placed lighting created the illusion of a magical forest in the heart of Manhattan. No expense had been spared. This was to be the setting for the next chapter of Alexander's life. On the morning of the gala, Alexander found himself standing in front of his bathroom mirror, studying his reflection as he adjusted his bow tie. Success had been kind to his appearance. Regular sessions with his personal trainer had maintained his athletic build, and the subtle signs of aging only added character to his face. But his eyes still carried that same shadow they had for 15 years, since the day a grave-faced doctor had delivered the news that had altered the course of his life. Zero sperm count, the specialist had said after months of tests. "I'm afraid the condition appears to be permanent, Mr. Hayes. There are other options for having children, adoption, sperm donors, but biologically fathering a child is not possible for you." Catherine had cried for days. Alexander had retreated into stoic silence, channeling his grief into 16-hour workdays. They had tried to move forward, explored alternatives, but the dream of having children that looked like both of them, that carried their joined DNA, had been too precious to Catherine. Eventually the emotional chasm had grown too wide to bridge. "You look very handsome," Rebecca's voice pulled him from his memories as she entered the bathroom in her robe, her dark hair still wrapped in a towel. She placed a gentle kiss on his cheek, careful not to smudge her already applied makeup. "Are you ready for tonight?" Alexander smiled, pushing the past away once more. "More than ready. Though I still think it's unfair that I haven't seen your dress." Rebecca laughed, a musical sound that always lightened his mood. "Fair? You've kept me in the dark about this entire event for months. The dress is my only advantage." She studied his face more carefully. "Everything okay? You seem a little distant." Alexander considered telling her about Catherine's expected appearance but decided against it. Why complicate the evening with old ghosts? Just the usual pre-event jitters. "I want everything to be perfect." "It will be," she assured him, squeezing his hand. "Now go finish getting ready and I'll meet you downstairs in an hour. I need the bathroom to work my magic." As Alexander left to give her privacy, his phone buzzed with a message from Vanessa confirming that everything at the venue was proceeding according to plan. He texted back his acknowledgement before opening his safe to retrieve the ring, a flawless 5-carat diamond set in platinum, custom designed to match Rebecca's sophisticated taste. Tonight would mark the beginning of his second chance at happiness, a future built on realistic expectations and mutual understanding. By 7 o'clock, guests had begun to arrive at the Whitley. Alexander stood at the entrance of the ballroom, Rebecca radiant beside him in a stunning ice blue gown that seemed to capture the theme perfectly without her having known it. She wore her dark hair swept up in an elegant twist, revealing the graceful curve of her neck adorned with a simple diamond pendant, his gift from their first anniversary. "You never cease to amaze me," he whispered to her as they greeted another couple. "How did you manage to pick the perfect dress without knowing the theme?" She smiled mysteriously. "Woman's intuition. Or maybe I bribed Vanessa for hints." Alexander chuckled, feeling the tension that had been building all day begin to ease. This was his night, their night. Nothing could overshadow that, not even the appearance of Alexander. "It's been a long time." The familiar voice sent a jolt through him. He turned to find Catherine standing before him, as elegant as ever in a deep burgundy dress that contrasted with her blonde hair, now cut in a chic bob that framed her face. At 43, she remained strikingly beautiful, though fine lines around her eyes suggested the passage of time. "Catherine," he managed, his voice carefully neutral. "Thank you for coming. He felt Rebecca's hand tighten slightly around his arm. "I wouldn't miss it," Catherine replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Congratulations on all your success. Hayes Industries is everywhere these days." Alexander nodded. "Thank you. Allow me to introduce Rebecca Miller, your fiancée-to-be if the rumors are correct," Catherine finished for him, extending her hand to Rebecca. "Lovely to meet you. I've read about your groundbreaking work in neurosurgery." Rebecca accepted the handshake with grace. "Thank you. It's nice to finally meet you as well." An awkward silence threatened to descend before Catherine spoke again. "I hope you don't mind, but I brought my children. They're just checking their coats." The invitation said +2 children. The word hung in the air between them. So Catherine had found what she wanted after all. Alexander felt a familiar pain twist in his chest, but he maintained his composure. Of course. The more the merrier. As if on cue, two figures approached from behind Catherine. Alexander prepared himself to meet her new family, to see the physical manifestation of what he could never give her. But as the pair drew closer, his practiced smile froze on his face. They were twins, a boy and a girl, perhaps 11 or 12 years old. The boy wore a miniature tuxedo with a slightly crooked bow tie, while the girl was dressed in a velvet green dress with a white sash. But it wasn't their formal attire that caused Alexander's heart to skip a beat. It was their faces that struck a chord of recognition so deep it momentarily robbed him of breath. The boy had his jawline, his nose. The girl had his eyes, that unusual shade of hazel with flecks of gold that he saw in the mirror every day. Both had a cowlick in their hair that swept to the right, just like his own stubborn lock that no amount of styling could tame. "Alexander, Rebecca, these are my children Ethan and Emma," Catherine said, a strange tension underlying her casual tone. "Kids, this is Mr. Hayes and Dr. Miller." The twins politely extended their hands, perfect miniature adults. "Pleased to meet you," they said almost in unison, with identical formal nods that seemed eerily familiar. "Likewise," Alexander replied automatically, his mind racing. It had to be a coincidence, a trick of the light, or his imagination working overtime after the stress of seeing Catherine again. There was no possible way. "Mr. Hayes has the same eyes as me, Mom," Emma observed innocently, looking up at her mother. Alexander saw something flash across Catherine's face. Fear? Guilt? Before she quickly redirected. "Many people have hazel eyes, sweetheart. Now let's find our table and let the hosts greet their other guests." As Catherine ushered the children away, Alexander stood frozen, staring after them. It wasn't just the eyes. It was the way the boy had tucked his hands into his pockets as he waited, Alexander's own nervous habit. It was the girl's slight dimple in her right cheek when she smiled. It was 100 tiny details that seemed impossible to explain away. "Alex?" Rebecca's concerned voice broke through his daze. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," he said automatically, though he felt anything but. Just surprised to see her after all this time. Rebecca studied him carefully. "That was your ex-wife, wasn't it? The one who left because I couldn't have children," he finished. "Yes." Rebecca frowned slightly. "Those children, they must be around 11 or 12. That means she must have met someone else quickly after our divorce," Alexander said, the math not escaping him either. "Let's not dwell on it. We have guests to greet." But as they continued to welcome the arriving partygoers, Alexander found his eyes constantly searching the room for glimpses of the twins. Each time he spotted them, that unsettling sense of recognition grew stronger. It wasn't just his imagination. There was something uncannily familiar about those children. Dinner was served at precisely 8:30, a 5-course masterpiece prepared by a celebrity chef. Alexander sat at the head table with Rebecca and their closest friends, but he found himself picking at his food, distracted by the table across the room where Catherine sat with her children. He watched as Ethan meticulously arranged his silverware between courses, another habit Alexander recognized as his own. When Emma laughed at something, her head tilted back at the exact angle he'd seen in photographs of himself as a child. "Your speech is in 15 minutes, Vanessa whispered as she passed behind his chair. "The ring is in position for the presentation." Alexander nodded, taking a deep breath. He needed to focus. This night was about his future with Rebecca, not puzzling over strange coincidences from his past. He reached for his water glass just as Emma, across the room, did the same, both using their left hands despite eating with their right. That peculiar mixed-handedness that had always made him stand out. "Excuse me," he murmured to Rebecca. "I need a moment before the speech." He made his way to a quiet hallway outside the ballroom, loosening his bow tie slightly as he tried to gather his thoughts. The similarities were too striking, too specific to be mere chance. But it was biologically impossible. The specialists had been clear. His condition was congenital, he had never produced viable sperm. There was no way those children could be. "They're yours," Catherine's voice came from behind him, quiet but firm. "I know that's what you're thinking and you're right." Alexander turned slowly, feeling as though the floor had dropped away beneath him. "That's not possible. You know that's not possible." Catherine moved closer, her eyes filled with a mixture of defiance and apprehension. "I thought so too until about 2 months after our divorce was finalized. When I found out I was pregnant. But the doctors, multiple opinions, they all said that you had azoospermia, yes. But what they didn't know, what medical science didn't fully understand then, was that some men with your condition occasionally produce a tiny amount of sperm, not enough to detect in standard tests, but enough for conception under the right circumstances." Alexander stared at her, disbelief warring with the evidence of his own eyes. "And you never thought to tell me? For 12 years, you let me believe I could never have children while you raised mine?" "I tried to contact you," Catherine said, a hint of old hurt in her voice. 3 times. Your assistant said you were too busy. The 3rd time you had your lawyer call me back assuming I wanted more alimony. After that, yes, I made a choice. I decided to raise them myself." "That's not." Alexander started, then stopped, memories flooding back. Those months after the divorce had been a blur of international deals and deliberate workaholic tendencies. He had instructed his staff to shield him from Catherine, assuming any contact would just reopen wounds that were barely beginning to heal. "They don't know," Catherine continued. "I've never told them about you, beyond that my ex-husband was a businessman named Alexander Hayes. I never intended for them to meet you, but then your invitation arrived and..." She sighed. "Maybe part of me wanted them to see where half their DNA came from. Maybe I wanted you to see what you missed." Alexander felt his knees weaken, and he leaned against the wall for support. "Twins," he whispered. "A boy and a girl. My children." "They're amazing kids," Catherine said, a mother's pride softening her expression. "Ethan is brilliant with mathematics just like you. Emma loves architecture. She designs the most incredible structures. They both have your stubborn streak, your analytical mind." Alexander's head was spinning. All these years, he had built his life around the certainty that he would never be a father. He had selected partners who didn't want children, had avoided relationships with women who might hope for a miracle. He had shaped his entire existence around accommodating what he believed was an immutable fact of his biology. "I'm going to announce my engagement tonight," he said, the words sounding strange even to his own ears. "To a woman who chose me partly because I told her I could never father children." Catherine's expression was unreadable. "I'm sorry for the timing. I didn't know that's what tonight was about." "Why now?" Alexander asked, sudden anger flaring. "Why come at all? You could have declined the invitation." "Maybe after 12 years I thought you deserved to know," Catherine replied. "Maybe I was tired of carrying this secret alone." The string quartet's music swelled in the ballroom, the cue that the announcement was imminent. Alexander's planned future and his unknown past had collided in the most spectacular way possible, leaving him standing in a hotel hallway with the weight of a dozen years of misconceptions crushing down on him. "I need to go," he said, straightening his posture through sheer force of will. "We will talk about this later, all of it." Catherine nodded. "They're good kids, Alexander. Whatever you decide to do with this information, please remember that." As Alexander returned to the ballroom, his mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. Rebecca smiled at him from their table, radiant and expectant, unaware that his world had just been completely upended. Across the room, 2 children, his children, laughed together, equally unaware that their lives were about to change forever. The orchestra concluded their piece as Alexander took his position at the center of the room. 300 pairs of eyes turned toward him, waiting for the announcement they all expected. But as he stood there, searching the crowd, his gaze locked with Emma's curious hazel eyes, his eyes, and he realized that nothing would ever be the same again. Alexander cleared his throat, the rehearsed engagement speech suddenly feeling foreign on his tongue. The crowd waited expectantly, champagne glasses poised. Rebecca smiled encouragingly from her seat, unaware of the internal crisis raging within him. He glanced at Vanessa, who stood near the audio equipment, nodding subtly to indicate everything was ready for his big moment. "Thank you all for joining me tonight," Alexander began, his voice betraying none of the turmoil beneath. It means the world to have so many friends, colleagues, and... His eyes flickered momentarily to Catherine's table, family here to celebrate this special occasion. He continued with practiced charm, describing the winter wonderland theme as a metaphor for new beginnings, for beauty emerging from cold seasons of life. The words felt hollow now, laden with irony he couldn't share. As he spoke about his journey to finding love again, he couldn't help but watch the twins from the corner of his eye. Emma was listening intently, her head tilted slightly, just as his mother used to say he did when concentrating. Ethan fidgeted with his cufflinks, twisting them clockwise then counterclockwise, a nervous habit Alexander had struggled with his entire life. And so, Alexander continued, approaching the moment of truth, it is with great joy that I've gathered you all here tonight not just for our annual winter gala, but for a very special announcement. This was it, the cue for the ring presentation. The string quartet began playing Rebecca's favorite melody as servers moved through the crowd with fresh champagne. Alexander looked at Rebecca, seeing the anticipation in her eyes, the complete trust and love she had given him over the past 2 years. She had chosen him, knowing he couldn't offer her children, believing that chapter of his life was closed forever. Before I continue, Alexander said, deviating from his script, I'd like to propose a toast. To unexpected discoveries and the remarkable way life can surprise us when we least expect it. Confusion flickered across Rebecca's face as the crowd raised their glasses. This wasn't part of the plan. Vanessa shot him a questioning look from across the room, but Alexander pressed on, buying himself precious seconds to think. Rebecca, he said, moving toward her table, you came into my life when I thought certain doors were permanently closed. You accepted me, all of me, including what I believed were my limitations. Rebecca's smile faltered slightly as Alexander took her hand and helped her to her feet. The spotlight followed them to the center of the ballroom, where a small table draped in white silk held a crystal box, the container for the engagement ring. I plan to ask you something very important tonight, Alexander continued, his voice lower now, meant only for her though the microphone carried it to the entire room. But circumstances have changed in ways I couldn't have anticipated. I need to ask for something else first, your patience. There's something I've just learned that changes everything, and before we take another step forward, I need to understand what it means. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Rebecca's expression shifted from confusion to concern. Alex, what's going on? She whispered. I promise I'll explain everything, he replied softly. But I can't ask you the question I plan to ask until I've sorted through this. It wouldn't be fair to either of us. To her credit, Rebecca maintained her composure, though her eyes searched his for answers he couldn't provide in that moment. Alexander turned back to the guests, who had fallen into a hushed silence. Friends, I apologize for the change in programming tonight. Please enjoy the remainder of the evening, the food, the music, the company. Rebecca and I simply have some matters to discuss privately. With a nod to the orchestra conductor, music swelled again, filling the awkward silence as Alexander guided Rebecca toward a private anteroom off the main ballroom. As they moved through the crowd, he caught Catherine's eye. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, understanding flooding her face. The twins watched curiously, unaware that they were the center of a drama unfolding around them. Once inside the private room, Rebecca pulled her hand from Alexander's grasp, her professional calm giving way to justified confusion. Alex, what the hell is happening? You've been acting strange all night and now this? Everyone out there thinks you just got cold feet about proposing. Alexander sank into one of the plush chairs, the weight of the evening finally crashing down on him. Rebecca, I'm sorry. Something's happened, something impossible, and I couldn't go through with the proposal until you knew the truth. What truth? She demanded, remaining standing, arms crossed protectively over her chest. Those children with Catherine, Alexander began, the words still feeling surreal, they're mine. Biologically mine. Rebecca stared at him, disbelief evident. That's not possible. You've been diagnosed by multiple specialists. You've built your entire life around the fact that you can't have children. I know. I've just learned that in rare cases, men with my condition can occasionally produce enough viable sperm for conception. Catherine found out she was pregnant after our divorce and, his voice broke slightly, and I never knew. Those twins are 11 years old, and they've been growing up without me all this time. Rebecca's medical training kicked in as she processed this information. Oligospermia with occasional viable production, she murmured. It's rare but documented. But Alex, are you sure? This could be a manipulation, a coincidence. You didn't see them up close, Alexander said, running his hands through his hair. They have my eyes, my mannerisms, even my mixed-handedness. It's like seeing myself at that age split into two people. Anne Catherine confirmed it. She tried to tell me years ago, but I was so buried in work, so determined to avoid more pain that I blocked any communication from her. Rebecca sank into the chair opposite him, the full implications dawning on her. So what are you saying? That you don't want to get engaged anymore? No, Alexander reached for her hand. I'm saying I need time to process this. To figure out what role I want to have in their lives, if any. To understand what this means for us. I couldn't ask you to marry me tonight, knowing that I suddenly come with additional complications I didn't know about this morning. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, her analytical mind working through the situation. Those children don't know who you are, do they? No. Catherine said she never told them. Then we have time, Rebecca said, her voice softening slightly. This isn't a crisis that needs to be solved tonight, Alex. It's a shock, certainly, but one we can work through. The "we" in her sentence gave Alexander a flicker of hope. You're not running for the hills? A small, sad smile crossed Rebecca's face. I fell in love with you knowing you couldn't give me children. I made peace with that long before we met. My career has always been my priority. This changes things, yes, but not necessarily in a bad way. She paused, considering her next words carefully. But Alex, you need to be honest with yourself. You've built your identity around this limitation. If suddenly that limitation doesn't exist, if you are capable of fathering children, does that change what you want from life? It was a profound question, one Alexander hadn't had time to consider in the whirlwind of discovery. For 15 years, he had redirected his paternal instincts into mentoring young executives, into philanthropy, into building a legacy through his company rather than through offspring. Had that been genuine satisfaction, or mere compensation for what he thought he couldn't have? I don't know, he admitted. But I know I need to meet them, really meet them. I need to understand who they are. Rebecca nodded slowly. Then that's what you should do. And I'll be here waiting when you figure out what you want next. Alexander leaned forward to kiss her forehead gently. I don't deserve you. Probably not, she agreed with a hint of her usual wry humor. Now let's go back out there before the gossip gets completely out of hand. I'll help you salvage the evening. You can make some excuse about the ring not being ready or whatever face-saving story you prefer. Then tomorrow you can figure out next steps with Catherine and those children. Meanwhile, back in the ballroom, the party continued with a slightly subdued energy, the guests uncertain what had transpired but too polite to depart early. Catherine sat rigidly at her table, watching the twins as they sampled desserts from the elaborate buffet, blissfully unaware of the seismic shift in their family story. Mom, can we explore the hotel? Emma asked, returning to the table with a plate of chocolate truffles. Ethan says there's a rooftop garden with an amazing view of the city. Catherine smiled tightly. Not tonight, sweetheart. I think we should head home soon. But it's only 10 o'clock, Ethan protested, glancing at his watch, a gesture so reminiscent of Alexander that Catherine felt a pang of guilt. You said we could stay until 11. I know, but, Catherine began, only to be interrupted by Alexander's reappearance. He and Rebecca had returned to the ballroom, both wearing practiced smiles though tension lingered around their eyes. Catherine, Alexander said, approaching their table. Could I speak with you? And perhaps properly meet Ethan and Emma? Catherine hesitated, eyes darting to Rebecca, who gave a small nod of encouragement before moving away to speak with other guests. All right, Catherine agreed quietly. Kids, Mr. Hayes would like to talk with us. The twins looked up curiously as Alexander pulled out a chair and sat down at their table. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. Ethan had inherited Alexander's strong jawline and analytical gaze, while Emma had his expressive eyes and the same small cleft in her chin. So, Alexander began awkwardly, your mother tells me you're quite the mathematician, Ethan. The boy's face lit up. I love math. I'm in the advanced placement program at school. Right now we're studying probability theory, which is my favorite. Probability theory was my favorite too at your age, Alexander said, a genuine smile breaking through his tension. I used to calculate odds for everything, which route to school would be fastest, which line at the cafeteria would move quickest. Me too, Ethan exclaimed, leaning forward eagerly. Mom says it's weird, but it's just logical. Alexander glanced at Catherine, who was watching the exchange with a complex expression. And Emma, I hear you're interested in architecture? The girl nodded, her initial shyness giving way to enthusiasm. I want to design buildings that work with nature instead of against it. Sustainable architecture that's also beautiful. That's remarkably thoughtful, Alexander said, genuinely impressed. I'd love to see some of your designs sometime. Emma beamed. Really? Mom got me a professional drafting table for my birthday. I have lots of sketches. As the conversation continued, Catherine watched Alexander interact with the children, seeing glimpses of what might have been if circumstances had been different. He asked insightful questions, listened attentively to their answers, and showed genuine interest in their lives without being patronizing, qualities she had long ago realized would have made him a good father. After about 20 minutes of conversation, Catherine gently interrupted. It's getting late and you two have school tomorrow. We should head home. Disappointment flashed across both children's faces, and Catherine noted with surprise across Alexander's as well. Before you go, Alexander said, pulling out a business card and writing something on the back, I'd like to invite all of you to brunch tomorrow. At my penthouse. We can continue our conversation in a more relaxed setting. He looked directly at Catherine as he handed her the card. There's a lot more to discuss. Catherine understood the layers of meaning in that simple statement. Yes, there is, she agreed quietly. What time? 11? The address is on the card. It's the Hayes Tower on Central Park South. The penthouse has a private elevator. Just tell security you're my guests. As the twins gathered their things, Alexander took a deep breath and added, and Catherine, I think it's time they knew the truth. All of it. Catherine's eyes widened slightly, but after a moment she nodded. Yes, I think perhaps it is. After they departed, Alexander found himself standing alone by the massive windows overlooking the snow-covered city. The party was winding down, guests beginning to make their farewells. Rebecca was across the room, handling the goodbyes with grace despite the evening's unexpected turn. He watched her, admiring her composure, wondering if she truly understood how drastically their future plans might change. Vanessa approached, her professional mask slightly cracked with concern. Sir, the jeweler wants to know what to do with the ring. Should I have them return it to your safe at home? Alexander considered for a moment. No. Hold on to it. This evening didn't go as planned, but that doesn't mean I've changed my mind about marrying Rebecca. I just need to sort through this new development first. Understood, Vanessa nodded. And sir, for what it's worth, those children seemed wonderful. They have your analytical mind. Alexander smiled faintly. They do, don't they? God, Vanessa, I have children. Actual biological children. After all these years of believing it was impossible. Life finds a way, Vanessa said with a small smile. Dr. Malcolm was right about that, at least. The unexpected Jurassic Park reference startled a laugh out of Alexander, breaking the tension that had gripped him all evening. Indeed he was. And now I have to figure out how to be a father to two preteens who have no idea who I am. If it helps, Vanessa offered, you've been mentoring young executives for years. You're patient, encouraging, and you know when to push and when to support. Those are good qualities in a parent too. Alexander appreciated her kindness, though he knew there was an ocean of difference between mentoring ambitious 20-somethings and parenting children. Still, perhaps those skills would provide some foundation for whatever came next. As the last guest departed, Rebecca approached him, slipping her arm through his. Ready to go home? It's been quite a night. Alexander looked down at her, this woman who had shown such strength and understanding in the face of his life's greatest upheaval. Yes, he said softly. Though I have no idea what happens next. That's tomorrow's problem, Rebecca replied, leading him toward the exit. Tonight we rest. Tomorrow we plan. The drive home was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. As they entered Alexander's penthouse, the cityscape twinkling below them through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Rebecca finally broke the silence. I'm going to sleep in the guest room tonight, she said gently. Not because I'm angry, but because I think we both need space to process. Alexander nodded, understanding but still feeling a pang of loneliness. I invited them to brunch tomorrow. Here. At 11. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. That's quick. 11 years have already been lost, Alexander said simply. I don't want to waste another day. Rebecca studied his face for a long moment. You're already falling in love with them, aren't you? Just from that brief interaction. Alexander hadn't fully acknowledged it to himself, but hearing Rebecca say it aloud made him realize the truth of it. They're extraordinary kids. Smart, curious, well-mannered. And they're mine. It's overwhelming. Are you going to tell them tomorrow? Rebecca asked. That you're their father? I told Catherine it was time they knew the truth, Alexander confirmed. She agreed. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. Then tomorrow will be momentous for all of you. Do you want me to be here, or would you prefer privacy for this family reunion? The question gave Alexander pause. What do you want? Honestly? Part of me wants to be here to support you. Part of me thinks this is something deeply personal that you should experience without an audience. And yes, part of me, the selfish part, is terrified of what this means for us. Rebecca's honesty was refreshing if painful. I want you in my life, Rebecca, Alexander said firmly. That hasn't changed. But I understand if you need time to decide if this new reality is something you want to be part of. Let me think about it overnight, she said. I'll let you know in the morning if I'll join you for brunch. With that, she kissed him gently on the cheek and retreated to the guest room, leaving Alexander alone with his thoughts. He wandered through the vast penthouse, seeing it suddenly through new eyes, the eyes of a father whose children would soon visit his home for the first time. The space that had always felt perfectly suited to his bachelor lifestyle now seemed oddly sterile, devoid of the warmth and personal touches that might make children feel welcome. The abstract art pieces, the minimalist furniture, the pristine white surfaces, all chosen for their aesthetic appeal rather than comfort or practicality. There were no games, no books suitable for preteens, nothing to engage young minds. Alexander found himself in his home office, staring at the photographs arranged on his desk. There were pictures of him receiving awards, shaking hands with business associates, even one with a former president. But no family photos. No connections to a life outside work. The realization struck him as profoundly sad. On impulse, he opened his laptop and began searching online for information about raising 11-year-olds. What were their developmental milestones? What interests were typical at that age? How did one even begin to connect with children who had lived their entire lives without knowing their father? The hours ticked by as Alexander fell down a rabbit hole of parenting websites, child psychology articles, and forums for non-custodial parents reconnecting with their children. By the time exhaustion finally drove him to bed at 3 a.m, his head was swimming with information, advice, and cautionary tales. As he drifted off to sleep, his last conscious thought was of Emma's smile, so like his mother's, and the way Ethan's eyes had lit up when discussing mathematics. Whatever complications lay ahead, Alexander knew with absolute certainty that he wanted to be part of their lives. Morning arrived with a cold, clear brightness that matched Alexander's newfound clarity. He had slept only 4 hours but felt more energized than he had in years. By 7 he was already on the phone with his executive chef, planning an elaborate brunch menu suitable for children but sophisticated enough for adults. By 8 he had arranged for a rush delivery of books, games, and small gifts that might appeal to Emma and Ethan based on their expressed interests. At 9, Rebecca emerged from the guest room, already dressed in casual but elegant weekend attire. She found Alexander in the kitchen, supervising the chef's preparations with unusual attention to detail. I see you've been busy, she observed, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. Too busy, Alexander admitted. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the time I've missed, all the firsts I didn't witness, their first words, first steps, first day of school. Rebecca put her hand over his. You can't change the past, Alex. But you can be present for their future. Alexander squeezed her hand gratefully. Thank you for understanding. Have you decided if you'll stay for brunch? Rebecca took a deep breath. I've been thinking about it all night. And I've decided that yes, I'll stay. Not just for brunch but for whatever comes next. If you still want me to be part of your life, knowing it now includes 2 children. Relief washed over Alexander. I was hoping you'd say that. I don't want to face this alone. You won't have to, Rebecca assured him. But Alex, we need to be careful. These children don't know you as their father yet. That revelation alone will be enormous for them to process. Adding the complication of a potential stepmother might be too much all at once. Alexander nodded his understanding. You're right. We'll take it slow, follow their lead. And what about marriage? Rebecca asked quietly. Is that still something you want? More than ever, Alexander said firmly. But you're right, timing is everything. Let's get through today, see how the children respond to the truth and go from there. The proposal can wait until the moment is right for all of us. Rebecca's smile was tinged with both relief and lingering uncertainty. That sounds reasonable. Now, what can I do to help prepare for our guests? The next hour passed in a flurry of activity as the penthouse was transformed. Alexander had arranged for subtle but meaningful touches, a stack of architecture magazines for Emma, a chess set for Ethan based on his interest in strategy games, comfortable throw pillows to soften the stark modernist furniture. Nothing too obvious or overwhelming, but enough to show he had been thinking about their comfort. At precisely 11 o'clock, the private elevator chimed, announcing the arrival of Catherine and the twins. Alexander and Rebecca stood together in the entryway, a united front despite the complicated emotions swirling beneath the surface. The elevator doors opened to reveal Catherine looking tense but determined, flanked by Ethan and Emma who gazed around the penthouse with undisguised awe. "Whoa," Ethan breathed, taking in the panoramic view of Central Park. "This place is insane." "It's like something from an architectural digest," Emma added, her eyes wide as she took in the soaring ceilings and dramatic windows. Alexander stepped forward, suddenly nervous despite all his preparation. "Welcome to my home. Please, come in and make yourselves comfortable." As they moved into the living area, Alexander noticed that both children were dressed more casually than the night before. Ethan in jeans and a button-down shirt, Emma in a floral dress with leggings. Catherine, however, remained formally attired in a tailored pantsuit, her posture rigid with tension. "This is Dr. Rebecca Miller," Alexander introduced. "She's my..." He hesitated, uncertain how to define their relationship in this context. "Girlfriend," Rebecca supplied smoothly, extending her hand first to Catherine, then to each child. "It's lovely to see you all again. Are you really a brain surgeon?" Emma asked, clearly impressed. Rebecca smiled. "I am. I work at Mount Sinai Hospital." "That's so cool," Emma declared. "I have so many questions about the brain." "I'd be happy to answer them," Rebecca replied warmly. "Perhaps during brunch?" "Everything is ready in the dining room." Alexander led the way to the dining area, where the chef had laid out an impressive spread: Belgian waffles, fresh fruit, a selection of pastries, eggs prepared 3 different ways, and a chocolate fountain that immediately captured the twins' attention. "Is that really chocolate?" Ethan asked, eyes wide. "It is," Alexander confirmed. "With strawberries, marshmallows, and banana slices for dipping." "Mom never lets us have chocolate for breakfast," Emma whispered loudly, causing Catherine to raise an eyebrow. "Special occasions call for special treats," Alexander said with a conspiratorial wink that earned him a tentative smile from both children. As they settled around the table, Alexander couldn't help but marvel at the strange tableau they created. His ex-wife, his current partner, and 2 children who shared his DNA but knew nothing of their connection to him. It was surreal, this family gathering that wasn't quite acknowledged as such. The conversation flowed more easily than Alexander had expected, with Rebecca skillfully engaging the twins in discussion about their interests and school activities. Catherine remained quiet, contributing only when directly addressed, clearly preparing herself for the difficult conversation that would follow the meal. When the children had eaten their fill and were contentedly satiated with chocolate and sugar, Catherine finally broached the subject they had all been dancing around. "Emma, Ethan," she began, her voice steadier than her expression, "there's something important that Mr. Hayes and I need to discuss with you." The twins looked up curiously, chocolate smeared around Ethan's mouth and a dollop of whipped cream on Emma's nose. Alexander felt a rush of protective tenderness so powerful it momentarily stole his breath. "Is it about why we really came to the party last night?" Emma asked perceptively. "Because you were acting weird, Mom?" Catherine smiled sadly. "You always were too observant for your own good." "Yes, it's about that. It's about Mr. Hayes and who he is to our family." Ethan frowned slightly. "I don't understand. He's your ex-husband, right? You told us that before." "Yes," Catherine confirmed, glancing at Alexander. "But there's more to the story. Something I should have told you long ago." Catherine took a deep breath, looking from the twins to Alexander and back again. "Emma, Ethan, the truth is that Mr. Hayes isn't just my ex-husband." She paused, gathering courage. "He's your biological father." Silence descended on the room. Emma's fork clattered against her plate. Ethan's eyes widened, darting between his mother and Alexander with confusion. "But..." Emma began, her young voice struggling to comprehend. "You said our dad didn't want to be part of our lives. That he left before we were born." Catherine winced, the pain evident on her face. "I didn't tell you the whole truth. When your father and I divorced, I didn't know I was pregnant. He had been told by doctors that he couldn't have children. That's part of why our marriage ended. By the time I discovered I was carrying you both, we were already divorced, and communications between us had broken down." "So you never told him about us?" Ethan asked, his analytical mind visibly working through the implications. "He didn't abandon us? He just didn't know." Alexander leaned forward, his heart racing. "I would never have abandoned you if I'd known," he said softly. "I've only just learned that you're my children. And finding out has been the most incredible, shocking surprise of my life. Emma turned to her mother, tears welling in her eyes. Why didn't you tell him? Why didn't you tell us? Catherine reached for her daughter's hand. At first I tried to tell him. But Alexander was traveling internationally, deeply involved in building his company. His staff blocked my calls, thinking I wanted more from the divorce settlement. After several attempts, I decided it might be easier for everyone if I raised you on my own. That was wrong, Mom, Ethan said with surprising maturity. Everyone deserves to know their real parents. Catherine nodded, accepting the rebuke. You're right. It was wrong, and I've carried that guilt for 11 years. Seeing Alexander's invitation to the party, I think part of me wanted this truth to finally come out. Alexander cleared his throat, emotion making his voice slightly rough. I understand why Catherine made the choices she did. We didn't end our marriage on the best terms, and I deliberately made myself unavailable. That was my mistake. He looked directly at the twins. But I want you both to know that learning about you is the greatest gift I could have received. I've spent 15 years believing I could never have children of my own. Finding out that I have not just one, but two wonderful children, it's miraculous. Emma's gaze was penetrating, so similar to Alexander's own discerning stare that Rebecca caught her breath. So what happens now? The girl asked. Are you going to be our dad all of a sudden? Alexander approached the question thoughtfully. I'd like to be part of your lives if you'll let me. I've missed 11 years that I can never get back. I wasn't there for your first steps, your first words, your first day of school. But I would very much like to be here for all the firsts still to come. He smiled gently. I don't expect you to call me Dad right away, or maybe ever if that doesn't feel right to you. But I hope you'll give me a chance to get to know you and for you to get to know me. Ethan, ever practical, asked, Do we have to move here? Change schools? No, Catherine assured him. Your lives don't have to change in any way you don't want them to. This is about adding to your family, not disrupting it. Rebecca, who had remained silent until now, added softly, Everyone in this room cares about what's best for you too. There's no rush to figure everything out today. Emma looked at Rebecca curiously. Are you going to be our stepmom? Alexander and Rebecca exchanged glances. Rebecca and I care deeply for each other, Alexander explained carefully. But any decisions about our future will include consideration of how they affect you. This is a lot to process, Ethan said, slumping back in his chair. Yesterday I didn't have a dad. Today I have a dad who's a millionaire with a penthouse. Despite the tension, Alexander couldn't help but smile at the boy's blunt assessment. Believe me, I understand how overwhelming this is. I'm still processing it myself. He hesitated before adding, Would it help if we spent some time just getting to know each other? No pressure, no big decisions. Just talking? Emma nodded slowly. I guess that would be okay. She glanced at her mother. Is it okay if we talk to him? Catherine nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. Of course it is. Alexander gestured toward the living room. I noticed yesterday that you're interested in architecture, Emma. I have some books that might interest you. And Ethan, I heard you mention chess. Do you play? The twins followed Alexander somewhat cautiously into the living room, where he showed them the items he had thoughtfully assembled that morning. As they began to explore these offerings, Rebecca gently touched Catherine's arm. Would you like some tea? I think Alexander could use some time alone with them. Catherine looked surprised at the kind gesture from her ex-husband's girlfriend but nodded gratefully. The two women retreated to the kitchen, leaving Alexander with his newly discovered children. In the kitchen, Catherine watched through the doorway as Alexander sat cross-legged on the floor with the twins, already engaged in animated conversation over an architecture book. He seems like a natural with them, Catherine observed quietly. Rebecca nodded, preparing 2 cups of tea. He's good with people in general, it's part of what makes him successful in business. But this is different. There's a connection there that's innate. Catherine accepted the steaming cup, her hands trembling slightly. I've made so many mistakes. At first I truly did try to tell him. But after those attempts failed, I convinced myself it was better this way. That he wouldn't want the complication of children when he'd been so career-focused. She shook her head. Then as years passed, it became harder and harder to imagine how I would ever explain my silence. You were raising twins on your own, Rebecca said, her tone free of judgment. That couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, Catherine admitted. But they've been the greatest joy of my life. I just hope they can forgive me for keeping this from them. Children are remarkably resilient, Rebecca offered. And they clearly adore you. Catherine studied Rebecca with new appreciation. You're very understanding given the circumstances. Most women might run screaming from such a complicated situation. Rebecca smiled wryly. I've spent my career dealing with complexity and making difficult decisions. This is certainly a surprise but not necessarily a bad one. She paused. Besides, I fell in love with Alexander knowing he couldn't have children. That was never a prerequisite for me. Finding out he has children doesn't change how I feel about him, it just changes the shape of our future together. In the living room, Alexander was showing Ethan a complex chess strategy while Emma flipped through a book on sustainable architecture. So if you're our biological father, Ethan was saying, his scientific curiosity evident, why did doctors tell you that you couldn't have kids? Alexander considered how to explain in age-appropriate terms. I have a medical condition that makes it very difficult for me to father children. The doctors told me it was impossible, but clearly they were wrong. He smiled. You and Emma are living proof of that. Mom calls us her miracle babies, Emma said, looking up from her book. I guess that's even more true than she realized. You are definitely miracles, Alexander agreed, his chest tight with emotion. The most wonderful kind. Did you ever think about having kids? Ethan asked. Before you knew about us, I mean. Alexander nodded slowly. I always wanted children. When the doctors told me I couldn't have any, it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to accept. It's part of why my marriage to your mother ended. She wanted children very much and I couldn't give her that. Or so we both believed. That's sad, Emma said thoughtfully. But now you know you can have kids. Does that change things with you and Dr. Miller? Alexander was continually impressed by the twins' perceptiveness. Rebecca knew about my condition before we got serious. She's always said she's more focused on her career than on motherhood. But yes, this changes things in some ways. We'll all need to figure out what this means for the future. Do you have any other kids? Ethan asked practically. Maybe there are more of us out there you don't know about. Alexander couldn't help but laugh. No, I'm quite certain you two are my only children. And that makes you even more special to me. As the conversation continued, Alexander was struck by how quickly he felt connected to these children. His children. Emma had his intuitive understanding of people, combined with Catherine's artistic sensibility. Ethan had inherited Alexander's analytical mind and love of strategy. Both showed a curiosity about the world that Alexander recognized from his own childhood. In the kitchen, Rebecca and Catherine had fallen into surprisingly comfortable conversation about the twins' personalities and achievements. Emma has always been the artistic one, Catherine was saying. She sees beauty everywhere. Ethan is our household scientist, always experimenting, always questioning. They're extraordinary children, Rebecca said sincerely. You've done an amazing job raising them. Catherine smiled, her earlier tension beginning to ease. Thank you. That means a lot. She hesitated before asking, what do you think Alexander will want now? In terms of involvement with them? Rebecca considered the question carefully. Knowing him as I do, I think he'll want to be fully present in their lives. Alexander doesn't do anything halfway. But he'll respect boundaries, yours and theirs. She paused. This is uncharted territory for all of us. My biggest concern is the twins, Catherine confessed. They've had a stable, happy childhood. I don't want them caught in any conflict or feeling torn between homes. I don't think that's what Alexander wants either, Rebecca assured her. From what I can see, he wants to add to their lives, not disrupt them. Their conversation was interrupted by laughter from the living room, genuine, uninhibited laughter from both children. Catherine and Rebecca moved to the doorway to see Alexander demonstrating an exaggerated golf swing, apparently mimicking someone the twins didn't know. And then, Alexander was saying between chuckles, the club flew right out of his hands and landed in the water hazard. The man had to wade in up to his knees in his designer suit to retrieve it. The twins were doubled over with laughter at the story and Alexander's animated telling of it. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at the sight, how quickly they had connected, how natural they looked together. There was an undeniable bond forming already, confirming what she had both feared and hoped. Biology was powerful, and these children were undeniably their fathers. I think, Rebecca said softly beside her, that this is going to work out one way or another. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of conversation, games and cautious but growing connection. By the time Catherine announced they needed to leave for Ethan's afternoon science club meeting, a tentative comfort had developed between Alexander and the twins. Can we come back? Emma asked as they gathered their things, directing the question both to her mother and to Alexander. I'd love that, Alexander replied, looking to Catherine for approval. We can arrange something for next weekend, Catherine agreed, her earlier rigidity softened by the morning's positive interactions. As they prepared to leave, Alexander knelt down to be at eye level with the twins. I know this is a lot to take in. I want you both to know that I'm not trying to replace the family you already have. I just hope to be part of your lives going forward, in whatever way feels comfortable to you. Emma, impulsive and warm-hearted, suddenly threw her arms around Alexander's neck in a quick hug. I always wondered where I got my eyes, she whispered before pulling away, slightly embarrassed by her own action. Ethan offered a more reserved handshake, but his eyes held a new curiosity and tentative acceptance. Your chess strategy needs work, he said with a hint of his father's dry humor. We'll have to practice next time. I look forward to it, Alexander replied, his voice thick with emotion. After the elevator doors closed behind Catherine and the twins, Alexander turned to Rebecca, a mix of elation and disbelief on his face. That happened, right? I didn't imagine it. Rebecca smiled, wrapping her arms around him. It happened. You have two incredible children, Alexander. And they seem to like you. They're amazing, he said, still processing. So smart, so unique. How did I get so lucky? The universe works in mysterious ways, Rebecca replied, guiding him back to the living room. Now let's talk about what happens next. They settled on the sofa, the morning's emotional intensity catching up with them both. I want to be a real father to them, Alexander said without hesitation. Not just a weekend visitor or a distant figure. I've missed 11 years, I don't want to miss any more. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. I expected as much. And I think that's right. But it will require some significant changes to how we've been living. You mean our plans? The proposal? Alexander asked, suddenly concerned. Not just that. Your whole lifestyle, Alex. You work 16-hour days. You travel internationally at a moment's notice. Being actively involved in the twins' lives will require restructuring your priorities. Alexander hadn't considered the practical implications, but he knew immediately that Rebecca was right. I'll delegate more. Reduce my travel. Work more from home. You do that? Step back from the company you've built your entire life around. There was no challenge in Rebecca's question, just a desire to understand the depth of his commitment. In a heartbeat, Alexander said without hesitation. I built that company thinking it was the only legacy I could leave. Now I know that's not true. Emma and Ethan, they're my real legacy. The company can run without my constant oversight. I've built a strong executive team. But I can't delegate being a father. Rebecca's expression softened as she took his hand. That's how I know you'll be an excellent father. Your priorities are already shifting. What about us? Alexander asked. I know this isn't what you signed up for. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. I signed up for a life with you, Alexander. The specifics of that life were always going to evolve over time. She smiled. I never felt strongly about having children of my own, but I find I'm quite open to the idea of being part of these children's lives. They're remarkable, and they're part of you. Relief washed over Alexander. So the proposal can wait until the timing feels right, Rebecca finished for him. There's no rush. Let's focus on helping Emma and Ethan adjust to having you in their lives. The rest will fall into place. Alexander pulled her into an embrace, overwhelmed by gratitude for her understanding and support. I don't deserve you. Probably not, she agreed with a soft laugh, echoing her words from the previous night. But lucky for you, love isn't about deserving. In the weeks that followed, a new rhythm began to establish itself. Alexander rearranged his schedule to make time for regular visits with the twins. Sometimes at their home, sometimes at his penthouse, always with Catherine's full cooperation. The initial awkwardness gradually gave way to genuine connection as Alexander discovered the joy of being a father. Helping with homework, attending Ethan's science competition, admiring Emma's latest architectural sketches. Catherine, too, seemed to find peace as she witnessed the positive impact Alexander's presence had on the children. The guilt she had carried for years began to lift as she saw her decision to finally reveal the truth vindicated by the happiness it ultimately brought. One evening, about 2 months after the winter gala that had changed everything, Alexander found himself sitting on a park bench watching Ethan and Emma play with a high-tech drone he had given them. Educational, he had assured Catherine, as it taught principles of aerodynamics and remote control programming. Rebecca sat beside him, her hand comfortably entwined with his. They're flying it much better than I could, Alexander admitted, watching the children expertly maneuver the device through a series of obstacles. They're naturals, Rebecca agreed. just like their father. Alexander turned to her, suddenly serious. I've been thinking. These past 2 months have been the happiest of my life. Finding Emma and Ethan, having you by my side through all of it, I don't want to wait any longer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. This isn't the elaborate scene I planned at the gala. No string quartet, no champagne fountain. But it feels more right this way. He opened the box to reveal the same stunning diamond ring that had been intended for the announcement 2 months earlier. Rebecca Miller, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner? And if they'll have you, a mother figure to Emma and Ethan? Rebecca's eyes filled with tears as she looked from the ring to the children playing nearby, then back to Alexander. Yes, she said simply. To all of it, yes. As Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, a shout of triumph came from where the twins were playing. They had successfully navigated the drone through the most difficult section of their makeshift obstacle course. Their faces were alight with accomplishment and joy, the same expression Alexander now wore as he kissed his fiancée. Later that evening, after dropping the twins back at Catherine's apartment, Alexander and Rebecca walked hand in hand through the snow-dusted streets of Manhattan. The winter that had begun with a life-altering revelation was giving way to early signs of spring, a fitting metaphor for the new beginning they were all experiencing. I was thinking, Alexander said as they walked, about that diagnosis all those years ago. The doctors were so certain, so definitive in telling me I could never father children. Medicine isn't always an exact science, Rebecca replied. There are exceptions to every rule, rare cases that defy explanation. Or perhaps, Alexander suggested, gazing up at the stars just becoming visible in the darkening sky, some things in life are simply meant to be regardless of the odds against them. Rebecca smiled, squeezing his hand. The scientist in me wants to attribute it to statistical anomaly. But the woman in me prefers your explanation. When they reached their building, Alexander paused, looking back in the direction of Catherine's apartment where his children were likely getting ready for bed. You know, for 15 years I built my identity around what I couldn't have, around limitation and loss. I defined myself by what was missing, never imagining that life had something extraordinary in store all along. Sometimes the greatest gifts come when we've stopped looking for them, Rebecca observed. And sometimes they were there all along, just waiting to be discovered. Alexander nodded, thinking of the parallel journeys that had brought them all to this point. His path from isolation to family, Catherine's from secrecy to honesty, the twins from partial truth to complete identity, and Rebecca's from a carefully planned future to an unexpected but welcome new direction. I wasted so many years, he said softly. Years I could have spent with them. You can't change the past, Rebecca reminded him gently. But you have right now and all the days ahead. That's where your focus belongs. Alexander smiled, knowing she was right. In the span of a single winter, his understanding of himself and his place in the world had been completely transformed. The man who had believed himself incapable of creating life had discovered not only that he had done so, but that in embracing these newfound connections, he had found a fulfillment no business success could ever provide. As they stepped into the warmth of their home, Alexander felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. Life rarely unfolded according to plan, but sometimes its unexpected turns led to destinations far more beautiful than anything one could have imagined. His journey from successful but lonely businessman to engaged father and husband-to-be had taught him that the heart's capacity for love was limitless, and that it was never too late to discover new dimensions of oneself. The winter party that had been intended to announce one beginning had instead revealed another, far more profound one. And as Alexander Hayes, once the infertile millionaire, now the devoted father, looked toward the future with his expanded family, he understood that the greatest wealth in life had nothing to do with the fortune he had amassed, and everything to do with the love he had found when he least expected it. In the end, the most valuable lesson was clear. No expert could predict all of life's possibilities, no diagnosis could limit the miraculous ways in which life could surprise us, and no amount of success could compare to the simple joy of being connected to others. The true measure of wealth wasn't counted in dollars or achievements, but in the depth of bonds formed and the love shared between people who, by design or by chance, had become family. Sometimes, the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin exactly when we think our story has already been written. For Alexander, Emma, Ethan, Rebecca, and even Catherine, this unexpected reunion had opened a door to a future richer than any of them could have imagined, proving once again that life's greatest gifts often arrive in packages we never thought to look for, at moments when we least expect them.